You'll hear tonight about housing and knowing that the city is currently in a housing crisis. What can this site provide in terms of a range of units of housing and a range of affordability levels so that we're really thinking intentionally about how to address citywide issues. You'll hear tonight about transportation. We know that there's a lot of questions and concerns about how do people currently get to the train? What are the challenges on the B61 bus or other buses? And you'll hear how the transportation team has been thinking about the transportation network. And this last piece is so important, is ensuring that this project is financially viable and that the port is well capitalized. So these are the project goals. And as we go through the material in the presentation tonight, you'll hear some of these themes over and over again as we think about the future. So I said that we'll orient ourselves into the preferred site plan. For those of you who joined us at public workshop number 4, you're familiar with this. Earlier this year, we were looking at a range of different scenarios, 4 scenarios that we were in discussion with the task force on. And the scenario that we'll be talking about today is this scenario number 1, which is an optimal sized port that includes the UPS site just to the south of the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. So in total, this is 138 acres, 60 acres of port, and we'll go through all of these details together. All right, so here we're zoomed in a little bit more, and I do want to take a moment to highlight how the preferred site plan is reflective of community input that we've been hearing over the last few months. So we'll start down at the south. We've had surveys out in the field. We've had folks come visit us at our different office hours and open hours that we've had. We've had different public workshops. And we've heard a lot of folks talk about increased access to the waterfront and maximizing open space and thinking critically about flood protection. We've also heard a lot of support to retain and enhance light industrial spaces. I mentioned at Pier 11, how can we think about commercial, industrial, and creative uses at the site while again increasing access to the waterfront? Pier 12, where the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal is currently located. We've talked about a hotel, enhanced open space, and waterfront access. Here in the purple is where you see the maritime space. So this is the container terminal and what we call flex maritime. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the blue highway and being able to move goods by barge. So everything in purple is the port. And we've used this phrase, modern electric port, sustainable port, key to the plan here. In terms of improving transit, again, you'll hear this later in the presentation, but we've heard a lot about improving access north-south, but also improving access east-west and connections to the community. Here on the northern portion of the site, we've heard a lot of support and advocacy for expanding open space at Pier 7. So this is just south of Brooklyn Bridge Park, and also more support for increasing open space along DeGraw and Columbia Street. So what has changed? This has obviously been a very iterative process, and by iterative I mean there's been material that we've given to the task force, we've gotten comments back, material that we've brought to all of you, we've gotten comments back. And so there have been multiple components of the project that have changed. So for example, fewer housing units and more permanently affordable units. So one of the scenarios that we showed earlier in the proposal had upwards of 9,000 to 10,000 units of housing. The current proposal is 7,700 units with 35% affordability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. More open space, so we've increased the acreage of open space, particularly at Pier 7 and Atlantic Basin, and along the Red Hook waterfront. Also the more linear feet of waterfront access. We've increased the retail space, and we've heard a lot about the community asking for new facility space, experiential learning center, and a focus on the working waterfront and connecting the community to good paying jobs. And then we've also added more maker, creative, and industrial space. So the plan continues to change and evolve, and we're looking forward to getting your comments tonight. So in terms of some of these commitments, and I highlighted a few of them already, we've talked about increasing the units of permanently affordable housing to 35%, and 200 of these would be reserved for NYCHA residents. We're also talking about a $50 million fund to support affordable home ownership and preserve affordable housing outside of the BMT boundary. So this is about preserving affordable housing in existing communities. We've also been talking with our colleagues at NYCHA about a $200 million investment for NYCHA Red Hook houses and improvements. A mile-long waterfront greenway and 5,000 linear feet of public waterfront access. We've talked about $30 million towards workforce training, as well as a dedicated learning space within the site so that people can have really hands-on, hands-on workforce training experience. We've also been discussing with the task force the creation of an industrial developer fund to offer discounted industrial rents for the industrial spaces that are proposed for the site. $30 million towards a destination cultural space in BMT South. So this is like a welcome for folks who are coming in, whether it's through the cruise terminal, whether it's folks around the city, to really focus and highlight all of the amazing components of the community. And then one of the things that the team will talk about during the transportation section is a new electric shuttle that would actually support access to the train. And so we'll talk more about that in transportation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pippa, who's going to walk us through resiliency. Following that, Matt will talk through transportation, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Hello, I'm Pippa Brashear. I'm a principal at Scape Landscape Architecture, and I'm going to talk about the resilience aspect of the project today. Let's see if this doesn't work to advance the slides. So as Mikkel said, this is a generational opportunity to create a 21st century port in a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood, but it's also a generational opportunity to design and build for climate resilience from the outset, ensuring that all new development, be it port, housing, or infrastructure, is designed with future flooding and temperatures in mind. But it's also an opportunity to increase the resilience and decrease risk to the nearly 60,000 residents that live adjacent to the site. This is an investment in a resilient future for these communities and the waterfront. And that's what we want to focus on today. Oh, sorry. There have been a couple guiding principles to this resilience approach throughout the process. The first is that the redevelopment will include a multi-layered flood defense system that reduces flood risk to the site and surrounding neighborhoods. There's also a commitment to stormwater being managed on-site and using best practices, relieving rather than straining the existing drainage system. And finally, that streets and open space are not going to only contribute to that stormwater management, but help mitigate for urban heating and make this a cooler community. There has been a great deal of feedback from past public meetings like this, from workshops, from the task force around risk and resilience. And some of the frequent questions have really had to do with the level of coastal flood protection, the drainage infrastructure, and the overall resilience approach. But some of the common priorities and recommendations that Mikkel touched on in your overview that have centered around providing protection from future storms, ensuring that we're not putting new development, particularly housing, at risk, setting standard for resilient planning, and prioritizing green infrastructure. And really at the center of this, coastal flooding has been front and center in the concerns expressed, and that is understandable as the BMT site and the neighborhoods around it are very low-lying and prone to coastal flooding, and increasingly with climate change, flooding from high tides and even cloudbursts. The BMT site is exposed to flooding from multiple directions. This includes storm surge and wave action from the harbor, but also flooding across Red Hook from Gowanus and the Erie Basin. And planning needs to take into account all these flood pathways and also sea level rise. Sea level rise of up to 2 feet by 2050 and as much as 6 feet by 2100, which is reflected in this map. So over the past, and many of you and I myself have been involved in many plans for comprehensive coastal flood defense for Red Hook. Each includes a slightly different alignment or design, but pretty much all have recommended a perimeter protection for Red Hook, ensuring coastal flood defense for the entire peninsula. The BMT project and the resilience measures encompassed here will deliver the first section of a peninsula-wide flood defense system that has been envisioned by all these plans. The coastal flood defense alignment that's proposed as part of the BMT plan, if you see it in cyan in the middle map, represents about a third of what is shown and proposed in the HAT study, and it also extends to include the Columbia waterfront, which is left out of the HAT study. So this multi-layered flood defense system really has three components that reflect the diverse land uses and elements of the plan, right? So first are maritime areas that need to be designed to ensure that they're not inundated by high tides and frequent floodings, but also maintain direct water access that's critical to their function and operation. So these areas will be elevated to avoid regular high tide flooding, designed to be floodable and quickly recover after a storm, with critical infrastructure and elements elevated. Mixed-use development, including industrial, commercial, and new residential mixed-use buildings, will have first-floor elevations that keep them safely outside of the floodplain and meet the most current building code. But additionally, we're looking at site elevation and road elevation to ensure that they're not disconnected from the ground plane and connect seamlessly to the surrounding neighborhoods. The neighborhood flood defense system that I described will be integrated into new development between the port and upland uses, and largely integrated into open space, including new neighborhood parks and the Greenway, to ensure that it's part of this new district and not separate from it. So this multi-layered approach, here's sort of the plan diagram view, is really critical to addressing flood risk while maintaining water access needs at the site. In this plan, you can see the maritime areas outlined in blue that maintain that lower elevation and access, as well as waterfront parks. Those areas designed to be floodable. The neighborhood flood defense system, represented by the dark orange line in this drawing, will be a flood wall that's largely buried or integrated into other new site features like parks and the Greenway. New streets and developments, you can see the elevated proposed new streets in yellow, will be elevated, and mitigate that grade change from the surrounding neighborhood will be mitigated by gradual slopes and still provide passive access to the port and infrastructure. One of the questions that we've gotten a lot relates to what this means for the current Red Hook Coastal Resilience Project and how the BMT project will integrate that. And if you see the purple line on this map, that is Red Hook Coastal Flood Resilience. This project will proceed as planned with much needed near-term coastal flood risk reduction measures. And the BMT, you should think about the BMT flood defense as the next phase, building on and increasing the level of risk reduction provided as the next step in flood defense for Red Hook and the whole area. The next series of maps that I'm going to show illustrate estimated flood exposure in the long-term future, 2100, with the project in place. By the Red Hook Coastal Flood Defense System and the new BMT will protect this whole area through the 2050 10-year storm. But by 2100, we'll start to see sea level rise will make water levels in storms and high tide flooding higher, meaning that we'll start to see flooding and inundation that will be greater even in the 1% storm, much like the equivalent of Sandy. But, sorry. However, this is why, this residual flood risk is why it's so critical to think of the BMT flood defense strategy as that first step and stage in the comprehensive coastal flood defense strategy for the whole Red Hook Peninsula. What is proposed as part of BMT gets us at least a third of the way there. And the reality is this is not just another piece of the plan on paper. This is a pathway towards implementation and funding of that first step. So, it's important to keep in mind, this is not just about coastal flood defense. Managing stormwater and inland flooding will be part of the BMT redevelopment plan, and this plan will leverage proposed open space to manage stormwater and integrate best practices in green, gray, and hybrid infrastructure, integrating detention, retention, and conveyance into all the redevelopment that we're talking about. This is why the city is undergoing a DEP-led drainage plan for the BMT site and adjacent neighborhood that will identify infrastructure needs and the best strategy for managing stormwater and addressing inland flooding in Red Hook, Columbia Waterfront District, and the BMT site. So, while it's important to remember that we're at a preliminary planning phase here, we want to illustrate through some of the renderings and views you've seen before how these flood defense systems can integrate into the neighborhood. So here you see the orange line representing that flood defense wall between the development and the port, seamlessly integrated into a new greenway corridor, which at 60 feet is more of a linear park. The current gateway to Atlantic Basin and a re-envisioned gateway with the BMT in place provides a welcoming entrance and reinvigoration of the site, but also an opportunity to integrate flood defense into these elements. And highlights that in some places, deployable measures will be necessary to allow that maintain that access during storm when not in a storm event. Finally, to thinking towards the UPS site today, this is a critical component of the resilience system that by integrating flood defense in a new large waterfront park here, we're able to create flood defense in a way that is fully integrated into the design and avoids having to weave and retrofit flood walls along Ferris Street or other inland alignments. So I hope that this provides the desired clarity and aspiration for the resilience program, and I want to turn it over to Matt to talk about transportation.
Thanks, Pippa. Again, my name is Matthew Stout from One Architecture, and I will be sharing the transportation and mobility planning for the project. And before I get into it, I think it's really important to note that a project of this scale, we recognize requires a robust, comprehensive, and forward-thinking transportation plan that would not only benefit the site and the BMT site, but also the surrounding neighborhoods and really bring much needed access to transportation that is lacking today. And so through this planning process, we've identified 5 guiding principles that have really led the thinking of this transportation plan. The first of those is to improve transit access within the local community to the subway. We'll talk about specifically some of those ideas about improving bus service, the electric shuttle, as well as improvement to the ferry system. The second idea, which we're really excited about, is we have ambitions to create the most pedestrian-forward district in New York City. We have concepts that we feel will really be forward-thinking in the context of New York and how a city can be designed first and foremost for pedestrians. And a part of that goal is to really think critically about how we design the circulation of the existing and future street network to minimize impact on the local community. And core to that plan is how we create this pedestrian-forward neighborhood. We have to think critically about cars, limiting access to parking, and having a robust parking plan, and I will share some of those concepts with you today. And lastly, which is completely centered to the core idea of the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, is to support alternatives to heavy freight, get trucks off the road, better utilize the city's waterway, and really deliver goods in a more sustainable fashion. And so we'll also share some of those concepts with you. So these 5 themes will really be kind of brought up over and over again in this presentation. But these themes have really been coming from a very robust conversation both with this community and the task force. And we've been really encouraged by the push that we've been getting from the task force members into thinking more broadly and more comprehensive about the transit plan. And what you see on this screen is a distillation of some of the key themes that we've been hearing, and we look forward to talking with you during this breakout if some of these themes are on or off the mark. But we've been hearing on and on about getting more connection to the waterfront, of course better access to public transit, better east-west connection as well as north-south connection. We were talking about that earlier. And a lot of conversation about how we can address some of the existing traffic issues, particularly along Columbia and Van Brunt. So to get to the heart of the matter, I think many of us as Brooklynites and community members, we understand the transportation issues that are facing Red Hook. And I think that this map tells the story quite clearly, is that the black outline on the right side is the extent of the Brooklyn Marine Terminal site. And despite Red Hook and the Brooklyn Marine Terminal site being very well centered within the city of New York, less than 2 miles from Lower Manhattan, about half a mile from downtown Brooklyn, you can see from the transportation map that it's not very well connected to the subway, despite, as the crow flies, being really centrally located. And so we really see this project as an opportunity to change that. We see it as an opportunity to really rethink the way transportation moves through this area and improve and make improvements for everyone in the community. And so this planning process isn't done in a vacuum. We have been, and the team have been coordinating directly with MTA and DOT on this plan. Of course, all of us are aware of the ongoing planning work that DOT is doing for the BQE corridor. That's a regional transportation plan, and really bringing that piece of infrastructure into the next century. And again, we're working very closely with them, but want to be clear that the BMT project cannot solve every transportation-related issue facing Brooklyn, but we do have some really, I think, forward-thinking ideas that will improve the neighborhood and improve connections to this area, and we'll go into those in more detail. So what are some of these issues that we feel like we could address? The first of those is really looking at Van Brunt and Columbia streets. I think a lot of us know that Van Brunt and Columbia really do a lot for the neighborhood in terms of that north-south connection. It's where the buses go, it's where the trucks go, it's an important community commercial corridor. And we know that these corridors can be quite congested because of everything that it's doing. And we feel that by introducing new streets and thinking critically about where vehicles can and can't go, we feel like we can improve this circulation. The second that we've been talking about is, of course, the public transit access. We all know that the B61 is slow and unreliable. but it is the main bus artery through the neighborhood, and we have plans for improving that and increasing service. We know that the ferry system runs reliably, but it's not very frequent, and also sometimes not as clear to get to. Of course, you see the image here is the kind of experience that one has when they walk to the ferry stop at Atlantic Basin. So we feel like that there are substantial improvements that can be done there as well. And lastly, going back to this idea of a pedestrian first neighborhood, is that we know, similar to all greenways in New York City, is that the greenway is really not keeping up with demand. We have more pedestrians, more cyclists, e-bike mobility, starting to use these bike lanes. The bike areas are getting congested, and we can really leverage this project to create a wider, greener greenway for Brooklyn and the Red Hook. And so with those really kind of filter down into three main themes that we'll show you in the plan. The first of those is specific strategies and improving reliability of bus service. So this is creating a bus priority lane, creating traffic strategies that we can talk about in more detail during the breakout, in order to make sure that buses have priority and can move through the neighborhood as quickly as possible. This would also be paired with the electric ferry that was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. It's important that this plan start to implement some transportation improvements ahead of MTA, as we understand that MTA really will adjust those routes as demand comes on, and we want to make a plan that really starts to act more quickly than that. And the last two, of course, is we'll see images of our concepts and really expanding that bicycle network, not only the Greenway, but also concepts of really improving that east-west connection to the neighborhood. And lastly, making space for microtransit and other freight movements, such that we can really be moving into let's say, the next decade, and how goods move to your door and get a lot of those trucks off the road. And I won't go into this in detail, but as transportation planners, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox in order to implement these ideas. And here's a list of those broken out into several categories, whether it's the transit improvements, the bike and pedestrian improvements, street design improvements, policy goals, and freight strategies. So might be more productive to just start to look at a map on some of these concepts. So first I'll talk about transit improvements that the team is proposing. So this is a multi-pronged approach. We've been talking a bit about the B71. The B71 is the orange line that's going left to right on the page. The BMT site is on the upper part of the graphic. And so our proposal is to increase frequency of that bus and create traffic measures that would ensure that that bus has priority and can move up and down those streets more efficiently. But that's not the only connection that we need to make. We know we need to improve those east-west connections to the subway and to the city. And so we've been looking at a variety of bus line extensions that would be both in the southern part of the site and the northern part of the site to get you to the FG corridor and also to the Borough Hall subway stations.
And this would be 61. What do you mean?
Oh, 71. Oh, 61. Yeah, sorry. But speaking of the B71, another concept here would be to potentially reconnect the connection that the B71 used to do on Sackett and Union, again with the idea of making a stronger east-west connection to transit. And this could also include totally new lines, such as making an express bus connection through the Hugh Carey Tunnel directly to Manhattan. And so these are connections that we've been exploring, and again, just want to reiterate that these could happen as bus line extensions or implemented earlier with the electric shuttle service that was mentioned earlier. But I would be remiss not to mention again the ferry service is that our site has 2 ferry stops, and the city is committed to increasing that ferry frequency and also looking at the route service to ensure that those lines are going where people need to go. In addition, I was mentioning about the bicycle and pedestrian network. What you can see here at the top of the page, which is a solid green line across the page, is the expanded greenway that is on the side of the PMT. But as we move forward with this plan, we're also thinking critically and coordinating with DOT on off-site improvements that would make pedestrian and bicycle connections to the subway more intuitive and more safe. So that would be the blue lines that you see on this page are the connections up and either over or under the BQE today. DOT has identified those as potential investment areas for improvements, and this project team agrees that those improvements should be made, and would be looking to this community and the task force and feedback on the types of improvements that we'd like to see there. And regarding the pedestrian first concept and really a goal of minimizing traffic impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, is that this plan proposes a really robust parking strategy. And there are 3 strategies that we're proposing here. First is to not have any parking minimums for development. As many of you are probably familiar that in many neighborhoods, development has a parking minimum, and this proposal would have no parking minimum, so we don't overbuild parking. But with that, we would also introduce parking maximums, and through the EIS process, we would set that maximum to ensure that with less parking would mean less cars on the road. And then the last strategy of that would be to provide a district level parking. And so the concept here would be that not every building would have parking at the lower level, that we would consolidate that parking into discrete garages. That way they can be better shared and managed more efficiently throughout the district. And the last point I want to make about this is that the team proposes a series of transportation demand management measures. And so these are policy concepts that we can introduce to encourage more sustainable transit for neighborhood members as well as residents. Some of these kinds of strategies would be, for example, to require MTA or passes, et cetera, for tenants, provide subsidies for city bike, introducing car share requirements, et cetera. And in terms of moving freights, of course, core to the project is to build a modern electric port. But in addition to that, in terms of the upland neighborhood, we are really thinking about how we can be forward-thinking in terms of the urban design in order to make space for this new micro-mobility trend that we see with smaller freight vehicles moving through the neighborhood, how we can think about micro-distribution hubs, again, all with the goal of minimizing truck impacts to the neighborhood. And so before I share a few sketch renderings and we open it up to conversation, I just want to share with you how, on the site plan how some of these concepts are coming together. So what you see is the orange line on the bottom of the page is the Columbia and Van Brunt corridor. We are planning this to be really a bus priority corridor. All of our transportation decisions are to really make sure that buses can move along that space as quickly and smoothly as possible. A part of that is having an urban design that really controls and directs where trucks can move in and out of the port. And in the middle of the page, you can see our concept is to really concentrate that truck traffic to Hamilton and that BQE entrance at Hamilton. So this is to minimize any crosstown traffic that would happen in the neighborhood. You can also see the proposed expanded greenway along the edge of the port and the mixed use areas, as well as new proposed streets that will be on the BMT site. And again, we are planning those to be really pedestrian first, and they'd be a mix of mixed streets that vehicles would be limited in some cases, so pedestrians would be first in the neighborhood. So we've seen this graphic a couple times, but we wanted to share with you really how we are thinking about the street design to ensure that they really are for pedestrians first. And so this is that same graphic that Pippa showed you earlier in the presentation. And what you can see here is that through this roadway corridor, over 70% of the space is devoted to pedestrians, bicyclists, and green space. And so the way we imagine this street to work is that you would have really a linear park that has a pathway for pedestrians, a separate wider greenway for bicyclists, as well as a separate micro-transit lane, so we get some of those e-bikes off of the bicycle lanes. And of course, really making sure that we design a street in a way that provides maximum shade and tree cover. And here, just highlighting the transportation component of this roadway. We've been working really closely with the transportation team to make sure that we right-size these streets, and that we make sure that they are no wider than they absolutely need to be. And you can see here is that in this particular image, we're talking about streets that would just be one way in one direction, one way in another way, a loading lane and a turning lane. And on the left side, you can see here is that we're working with the maritime planners to ensure that we have internal circulation within the port, so those vehicles the entrance and exits of those vehicles can be controlled and managed in a proper way.
Don't worry about it.
And now we're moving closer to the edge of the site. This is an aerial image looking north along Columbia Street today. So this is DeGraw Street in the foreground with the port on the left side. And so with our, sorry, my clicker is kind of going wild. With our proposed street designs, you can see we're imagining that Columbia Street would really be a bus priority street, and that it would be really designed with dedicated bus lanes in order for the B61 to move more quickly. But again, I want to reiterate is that the most important part of all of this transportation planning is to ensure that we're maximizing space and safe spaces for pedestrians. And so here you can see highlighted in this image the areas that will be car-free. We can talk about that during the Q&A. Thanks.
We're in the Q&A again.
And so I'll wrap it up because it sounds like we're pretty anxious to start the conversation. So we saw this image, and I think it's important to just note that this is an aerial view looking at Pioneer Street in the future. We have our concepts really is to open up more space along the waterfront for pedestrians and cyclists, and really get that open up that private road that is right now is queuing space for the ferry terminal. And here is a view further south along Ferris Street today. So on the left side, you can see the southern end of the B&T site. This is the UPS site on the left side. And the way we imagine this street design to work is that the Ferris Street would be widened in order to make it sufficiently wide enough for bus stops. And shuttle service, as well as more space for the greenway. And again, with over 60% of this space devoted to pedestrians. And with that, I will hand it off to start the Q&A, but I just want to reiterate today's deep dive discussion was on two important issues, resilience and transportation, but we definitely don't want to lose sight of some of the key metrics that are included in this plan, including 60 acres of new electric port, 30 plus acres of public space, including more waterfront access, more homes for New Yorkers, as well as more space for industrial maker and commercial areas. And so with that, I'll pass the mic for Q&A.
Thank you. Can we please invite our presenters? So as we get into the question and answer period here, I'm first going to hand it over to Congressman Daniel Goldman, who's joined us during the presentation.
Thanks very much. I'll be brief. I know everybody has a lot of questions. I'm glad to be here. I'm really happy we're doing this. We on the task force have been working very hard to take in all of the community's input. This is a unique situation. There hasn't been a task force like this for a project like this, and one of the things that the chair's ensured is that the task force has final approval over this master plan, which ensures that the community input will be taken into consideration. And to the city's credit, it has already significantly been taken into consideration, but there's more work to be done. I'm grateful for all of you to be here, and I look forward to hearing your concerns, because I truly view the task force to be a representative of the community, and making sure that in a very complex project that we can include as many priorities of the various communities, because there are multiple communities that are impacted by this, as possible. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.
Thank you, Congressman Goldman. All right, folks, we're now going to move into the question and answer period of the evening. We've got a panel of experts at the front of the room who will help answer questions at this evening's event. Starting from the right side of our panel, I'll first introduce Nate Gray, the Senior Vice President of Neighborhood Strategies at the Economic Development Corporation. Next to him is Seth Ullman, the Vice President of Transportation Planning at EDC. Next to him, we have David Lowen, the Senior Vice President of the Asset Management Division. Next, we have Alexis Taylor, the Vice President of Climate Resilience at EDC. And then from the design team, we welcome Matthew Stout, a director at One Architecture, as well as Pippa Brashear, a principal at Scape Landscape Architecture. And finally, at the end of the table, we have Mikkel Adgate, the Senior Vice President of Government and Community Relations at EDC. So, we're now going to get into Q&A. I will invite folks to start to approach the microphones in the aisles if you're interested in asking a question. As folks come up and as you ask your questions and share comments, I'll note a few things. First off, we ask you to please be respectful to everybody in this room. The neighbors who have given their time this evening to come out, the folks who are on the panel, who are presenting and answering our questions here. The next thing I'll ask is that as you present, we will ask you to keep your comment to within 2 minutes so that we can have as many folks ask questions and comments as we can this evening and get to as many answers as we possibly can. So I will be moderating and turn it over to the panel for answers. I'm going to start off to the gentleman on my left over here to ask the evening's first question. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to thank you all for being here. This is an extremely important project, and your time and commitment is appreciated. One of the key commitments in this brochure is for workforce training programs and dedicated experiential learning center. I believe
said in the beginning of her remarks, the heart of this project is figuring out a way to revitalize and modernize the port. And the port has been neglected for decades. And unfortunately, when you have disinvestment and lack of maintenance on a maritime facility like that, it becomes very expensive to revitalize it and to bring it up into the modern day and age. And so because of that, we're estimating it's about $1.7 billion that needs to be invested in the port. And we think that that's worth it. We think that the port is going to have extremely positive impacts on the way we move freight throughout and into and out of and around the city. But in order to raise that much money, we need to be very creative in how we're thinking about it. The city, if you guys could let me finish, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So the city has already committed $55 million towards maritime infrastructure. We've also committed $15 million to buy a new electric crane, which we've already ordered and should be arriving in the next 18 months or so. And the city has recently, in its upcoming budget, put in $109 million in matching funds for the $164 million grant, which we've also already gotten. So that's about $350 million in public money that's already been accumulated for this project. In addition to that, the city doesn't just have access to capital budget. The city has lots of resources and lots of different assets in its name, and the capital budget is only one way that the city can support a project. The city also controls the real estate around the site, and the city also controls the potential for pilots or payments in lieu of taxes. And so the additional funding that's needed to access the site would be accrued through realizing the value of the land on this property by leasing it out for market rate housing, as well as diverting the payments in lieu of taxes that would otherwise go to the city budget, again, to support this project. So all of those are different ways, but they're all part of the same idea, which is this is city capital, this is city financial money. Getting back to your question about alternatives that you proposed, we have looked very closely at alternatives, and the funds that are required, the level of funds required, could not be generated through those other uses. They are useful uses, they just do not have the same financial impact and same revenue source as market rate housing. Please let me finish. Please let me finish. I'm not finished. In addition, again, I really appreciate it if you let me finish before you respond. Thank you. In addition to that, you also made a very compelling point, and I totally agree that it's important that this site not just have one-time economic impact on the construction of buildings, but prolonged economic impact through a lot of businesses. It's important to note that this site is not a housing site only. We've already talked about the port as being an important economic engine. The site that we walked through before also includes hundreds of thousands of new industrial square feet of new industrial space that will also serve that market. That space that we're talking about, that hundreds of thousands of commercial and industrial space, is the type of space that you're talking about, right? Like a Chelsea Piers building is essentially a commercial industrial building. And we've looked at that market, and we think it's important to have those type of uses. We think it's an important part of the overall economic pie, but it doesn't generate the funds necessary. So it doesn't hit both those things. It satisfies one of the needs you're talking about, and we totally recognize it and agree with it, but it doesn't hit both. And we need to have a multifaceted plan to accomplish all the things we're trying to apply.
Can you show us the numbers of that?
So, Kai, yeah, I can answer this part because we did just receive a series of proposals from 160 Inlay. We received it yesterday. The team is reviewing, and we're scheduling time with you and your neighbors to go through it, and we'll be, talking about the finances as well. And I just want to highlight to something that David said in terms of the amount of community facility space that is currently being proposed. It's over 280,000 square feet, so there is community facility space proposed in the current preferred plan. And then when we meet together, we can talk about more detail about your specific proposal.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much, sir. We're going to go over here to the next question. Please introduce yourself and ask, and afterward we'll go to the audience for a seated question. Please, miss.
Hi, my name is Taylor Truitt. I live in the Columbia Street Waterfront District. I'm also a business owner in Carroll Gardens. This is going to build a little bit upon the questions that was just asked there. You've already reiterated that the city is putting forth about $300 million, give or take, towards this project. And if you're relying exclusively more on the long term to make up for the $1.4 billion on housing income, we also know that this city, our beloved town, is really terrible at budgets. And being able to forecast the cost of things, not to mention the past 5 years, construction costs have gone up about at least 35%. What's the stopgap here, and how do we know in the time frame of which I haven't heard a time frame yet of what this is all going to take place? I think it's a very legitimate question because it's going to affect my family and all of us around here of all this construction. So how do we know you're not going to run out of money in the middle of us and we end up with a patched up BQE situation with 2 lanes that's just jamming up everything else? Because I just don't trust that there is fiduciary wherewithal to know that we're going to make to the final stage where we have 65% luxury units and all the cars that go with that, by the way, to ensure we get to whatever this dreamscape is.
Thank you very much, miss. The question about the budget, the timing, and the phasing of this approach.
So thank you for that question. It's a very important question, and it's a question, I think we have some task force members here as well. At an upcoming task force meeting, we are actually scheduled to go through the plan for phasing that answers just the questions that you're talking about. But in short, the money that we have secured so far, that is, as I mentioned, a combination of city capital funding as well as federal funding grants that we've received. We're viewing that as the seed money that would start the project, and using that money we can start designing and investing in the port facility, and we are working with the city to create a phasing plan that shows that we're going to build this in stages and in phases, and so we're going to make commitments to not just build the market rate housing and then walk away. The housing will be built proportionately between the market rate and the affordable in the first place, and secondly, we're leading with the port project, and we're building the infrastructure that supports the housing and also creates the resiliency in transportation projects. All of that is, I think, a very important subject, but it needs to be kind of dealt with on at a public level after we've had a chance to fully vet it through the task force, which is, as I mentioned, is the topic for our next task force meeting. But the overall plan that we are going to be presenting will have commitments in it to build this proportionally and to take the revenue that's generated from one phase of the plan and pour it into the next phase of the plan so that it feeds off of itself. In terms of timing, we're looking at around a 10-year timeline for the project, which, based on the size and scope of this project, seems to make a lot of sense. It will obviously be dependent on market forces. My previous job before being here was working at Brooklyn Ridge Park, which was built over 15 years. During the 15 years that project was built, we went through 2 recessions. And we had to pause on some development for a little while and then regroup. And it's anticipated that any project of this size and scope will have moments like that as we go through. But there are similar. But New York City has a long history of working on big projects like this that have gone through economic cycles and that still come through the other end.
Thank you very much, David. And can I see hands in the audience for folks who can't approach the mic but want to ask a question? Excuse me. Not seeing any hands, I'd like to go to you, Miss. Please.
Hi, my name is Lisa Meyer. I'm a neighborhood resident. My questions are to Seth, Nate, and Matthew. First of all, when I looked through this plan, the thing that stood out was the BMT process will not address local and regional effects of BQE. That's absurd. I mean, from the beginning, I kind of said, yeah, we have a problem from the tip of Red Hook all the way to the Heights, and you can't just create a project without addressing the current situation. So that was the first thing I saw. Second, when Matthew said, my question was, what are the alternatives to Van Brunt in Columbia? We only have, in terms of Red Hook, we have Van Brunt Street, we have Bay Street. Those are basically the streets for trucks to go. Both of them, Van Brunt Street is major commercial living street. Bay Street has all kinds of baseball fields, soccer fields, community centers, and so forth. So I don't really understand what the other alternatives are. Also, I assume by these bus lanes you're talking about that there would be no parking on Columbia or Van Brunt Street. So all of the people who live in Columbia waterfront, I don't know where they're putting their cars. So they don't have garages. Okay, so that's something I don't know, thought about. Next thing, the cruise terminal. We've been living for ages trying to get traffic dealt when the cruise ships come in. And I proposed to Andrew Kimball at a meeting 2 years ago the idea of having shuttles. I was on the B61 about 2 weeks ago, and there were all these tourists and they had their suitcases, and I was happy to see that they weren't calling Ubers, but I was standing in the well of the bus. There was a lady with a stroller. They stopped picking people up by the time you got to Baltic Street, so anybody from there was no room on the bus. They haven't done anything, and it's been 2 years, and they haven't figured out a voucher system or anything to get people off the cruise ships out of the neighborhood quickly. And when you're talking about this whole Union Street, where there used to be the B71, I proposed that there was some kind of shuttle that left from the cruise terminal that went up Union and got people over. And you guys haven't even done that in the last 2 years. You haven't dealt with the boat. And it's absolute craziness. So this is where the community has no faith in the EDC, because you haven't dealt with the issue with the cruise terminal and the ships coming in and getting people off the boats in any kind of a normal traffic pattern.
Thank you very much.
And I don't know if you've also addressed, like, what is this going to do to the FMG? I mean, it's already crowded, so you're proposing largely getting these people over to an overcrowded and not one of the best, subway records in terms of timely trains.
Miss, thank you for the questions on transportation.
So,
Let's get
the
an answer.
transportation, and I mean, the last thing I just would say, you're adding 7,700 people. It is a pipe dream, given these people don't have cars, or won't be using Ubers. So, I just don't understand any of it. I walk this street every single day, I just can't understand it, and
Double that.
welcome to come back. I was walking through this from 6 in the morning. So
Thank you for your
yeah.
invitation. I'm first going to go to Matt, and then we can also go to Seth if needed.
Okay, why don't we talk about the overall plan? Can we go to slide 43? So the question of the other north-south route. So the two new streets proposed here that might not have been totally clear are extensions of Conover and of Van Brunt that actually creates a second north-south street. So the question was asked, where else could trucks go? How do you really create space for the bus to have true priority on its current route on Van Brunt in Columbia? That's how, is you create another street for all the vehicles that are currently in the way of the bus to get north and south in the neighborhood. So, yeah, can you, so that, but it doesn't have public access. And so this would make it a public street. And then similar for Van Brunt, where it turns at DeGraw today, it would continue and as Van Brunt all the way up to Congress. And so you create a second north-south street that creates room for real priority on the bus on the existing Van Brunt in Columbia. The question of where the trucks go, when we first started talking about this concept some months ago, we talked about moving the truck route to those streets, getting them off the retail commercial corridors of Van Brunt and Columbia where so many people live, and getting them on the streets where fewer people live, or where new buildings can be designed so the impacts are not so great. We've heard some people supportive of that idea and others not as supportive. You can still do a busway with trucks. The important thing is getting the rest of the traffic off. So the truck, there's really a choice that this community can make with DOT about where the trucks go. But without this project, you're right, there's nowhere else for them to go, at least in the north-south direction. Opening up those public roads creates that possibility. I think the larger... Yeah, so the concept there is to push as many vehicles as possible towards Hamilton. So today the container port entrance is on Union, which forces all the trucks going into the port onto local streets. There's no other way to get there. So what we propose is to move the entrance to Hamilton, the exit to Bound, in a way that funnels them directly to Hamilton and the BQE on-ramp there, reducing the time the trucks are spending on streets in the neighborhood today that are going to and from the port. So by introducing new streets, by sort of working our way up from scratch, we're trying to move as much of the traffic that today is going all across the neighborhood, right? You have vehicles coming out of the Amazon warehouse going all the way up, either on the Greenway for the micromobility or on the road, going all the way up to the Atlantic, right? And so our proposal is by creating a new north-south street, we can pull them off. We can push them towards Hamilton, and we can reduce the impact that they're having in the community.
Hamilton and all Van Brunt. I mean, the way they're named, it's like technically coming down is Summit, Tesla, that's Summit, that's not Hamilton.
Right.
So you're talking on,
I'm talking about the Hamilton BQE on-ramp road.
well, there are two roads there. I mean, you can go down Bisbee, I'll show you. I mean, you've gone there, but there's a skateboard park, and then there's this thing which is called Hamilton next to it, which is collapsing. The storm drains are collapsing on the street. I have called 4 times maybe over the last 2 years because potholes are collapsing. I mean, literally, we're probably gonna have a truck fall in. We're gonna
Miss, thank you, and we will take you up on the invitation. I also want to head to Matt to talk about parking.
That answer made no sense, just so you know.
Well, you were also asked about parking, and I want to make sure that we can address the question about parking as well. Please, Matt.
Yeah, okay. My mic was on. So, your question was about where would the parking go on Van Brunt and Columbia, correct? Yeah. So, we're still working on the plan of that, but the idea is that at certain intersections and to ensure that turning motions will be sufficient, some parking spaces will be removed, but we feel that that there will be also street parking on the new streets for the new B&T site that would mitigate any of that parking loss. So.
I'm talking to people who live in Columbia Water Park now.
Yeah.
Where do they go? I'm just asking for them. Where do they go?
Miss, thank you. We'll certainly take this into account, but I want to make sure we can also get to as many folks as we can who want to ask questions and share comments. So thank you very much, Miss. Please, I'll hand to you next, Miss.
Hi, my name is Sadie Hoke. I'm 16. I would like to come from the perspective of someone who doesn't fully know what's going on, but is also, I feel scared for my future living in this neighborhood, I think. I've heard a lot about this. I've heard a lot of different people talking about it, the good and the bad of it. And I just wanted to talk about the houses that are being put up. When I noticed on the map, a lot of the yellow parts of the map are talking about housing. I know a lot of small businesses that are going to be in those areas, and I just wanted to know what would be happening to them. I feel like Red Hook is a very safe and community-based place when it comes to small businesses, and I don't know exactly, I feel scared for what's going to happen to that aspect of the community. And I'm coming up here specifically because I'm not informed, but also because I feel scared because that's just what I saw a lot of on here, and yeah.
Thank you so much for your question, Sadie, and thank you for coming out to attend this meeting. I'm going to hand it over to Mikkel.
I also want to thank you for coming out tonight. There's a lot of other probably cooler places that 16-year-olds could be, so thank you for spending your time with us. I can certainly understand that when you think about a project this big, 130 acres is a lot of space, and when you think about change, like it can certainly feel like overwhelming, and I understand the word scary that you're using, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way when thinking about change coming to a community like this. I think that your point about small businesses and what does a project like this mean for existing businesses in the community, but also the potential for future businesses in the community is important. And one of the reasons why when we talked about what are some of the benefits and the commitments that a project like this could bring, so that is additional space, additional commercial and retail space, when it is reduced rent prices for industrial and creative and maker space. We know that Red Hook has a really vibrant artist community. And so a lot of those concerns that you raise, we talk about quite regularly as a project team, and how we can think about this project as not just the future of modern maritime and the port, but also the future of small businesses, and how can entrepreneurs really have the opportunity to grow here. So I hear you, and I want to make sure that it doesn't seem like we're being dismissive of that when we're talking about a really, really big project, but it is something that we take very seriously. So thank you.
And just, sorry, one more thing. When you were talking about the houses on Columbia, we kind of moved on kind of from that, but so I would like to know a little bit more about that as well, from what she was talking about just now.
So when we're talking about housing on Columbia, that is this section here, this BMT North portion. And so the current proposal has, I think, 3,800 units of housing that would be in this section here. And it is proposed to be mixed income. So yes, we're using the term market rate, but we're also talking about affordable housing. There's a phrase called 60% AMI, which is, a very technical phrase, but it's really about having a mixed range of income uses and mixed ranges of unit sizes, so not just studios, but sizes for families, so that it's a really mixed income community is what we're talking about. So that's the BMT North. There's also housing proposed for the Atlantic Basin portion and also the BMT South portion.
Thank you so much for your questions, Sadie. Very much appreciated, and I hope you keep coming out to these meetings. I'm next going to go over to the gentleman who is working on lunch.
My name is James Morgan, and I okay, hi, better? My name is James Morgan. My wife and I have lived in the Columbia Street Waterfront District for 30 years. We really appreciate Congressman Goldman being here. If he would really like to understand what his constituents and the voters of this neighborhood are feeling right now, which is they're feeling assaulted by this project, which we have been from the very beginning. And just to build off of the young lady's question, you said, the whole thing is, this comic book you keep putting out is just obfuscation and misdirection and pretty drawings and promises. As far as almost everybody I talk to is concerned on this side of the stage, like 60% AMI. You know what that is. Say a number. It's not a small number. It's not what most people would think of when they think of so that's quick question. What are you estimating the average household size is for each unit of this housing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just quick.
Thanks. So thanks for the question, James. We're looking at the housing is a range of sizes, and something that we've heard from the task force is that we need to be able to provide family-sized units within the program. And this is something that's come up in the community outreach too. So
would that be a good average? 3 people per
Three
unit?
people. I would look at probably census tract information. I don't know it off the top of my head what the average size is, but the average household size in these districts are. But what we're trying to provide for is in response to the community feedback is housing that could be studios, 1, 2, and probably maybe up to 3 families within the unit. So we're going to continue to work with the task force on what those sizes
For the sake
could
of
be.
argument, would you say 3 people per unit?
Sure, for the sake of argument.
Okay.
So we want to be able to, just to
You're
finish.
now proposing roughly 8,000 units of housing, right?
7,700 is in the preferred plan right now.
Roughly 8,000 is what I said.
Sure.
Okay, see, this is what I mean about being cute all the time. Now, that's down from the 13,000 you were secretly planning all along, which we only found out about the day after you had a nice public meeting like this. You had a private meeting in the same space where we found out you neglected to tell the people the day before that you had determined you needed 13,000 units of housing to fund this infrastructure project, which is a whole other point. Why an infrastructure project with our courts has to be funded on our backs. With a giveaway, the largest giveaway in my lifetime of public land to private real estate developers. Okay? So now you're talking 8,000. 8,000 times 3 people is 24,000 people. Okay? Google Cobble Hill's population. Cobble Hill, it says there's a population, the last census, 8,000 people over 36 blocks. Columbia Waterfront District, 4,000 people over 22 blocks. You're talking about adding 24,000 people to this neighborhood. You're blowing this neighborhood up. I had to get to page 43. And then use my magnifier to find the cross street to see what my neighborhood is supposed to look like. All these pretty drawings stop at 10 stories. I had to count them myself. We have no idea how high these are going to be, but obviously the majority of this housing is going between DeGraw and Atlantic. You are blowing up this neighborhood. So now you're talking about tripling the size of the Cobble Hill population tripling the size of the Columbia waterfront current population, all in an area, this narrow strip of flood-prone land that used to belong to the public and be an active port.
Sir, thank you.
And I'm sorry, then you're talking about minimizing parking, right? You think people who pay millions of dollars for waterfront housing are going to take the B61 to a shuttle to the subway? Which, God forbid, we need an ambulance, a fire truck, or a police officer, can't get down almost any time of the day, at any day of the week right now. And it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future because where all your drawings and maps end is the elevated portion of the BQE, right up here over your heads. And that's where all that traffic gets funneled to.
So
I don't see how any of this, and in closing, because I know I'm going on here, I just want you to know how we feel, the Congress. Why should we believe anything that comes out of this process and this group of people at this point when you've done nothing but obfuscate, deceive, and outright lie about what your intentions were? That's right. This whole thing was designed as a giveaway of public land to the real estate developers and everything else to get us to that point.
I'll take the last part first. Just on process and goals. When we set out at the beginning of this, we wanted to be able to engage the public in a variety of ways. And I feel like we've been very clear at the beginning of this that our goals were to maintain a financially viable project, to be able to have a self-sustaining port that could stand on its own 2 feet financially. We talked about this, John, from the very beginning. And then also, importantly, to be able to provide.
Oh my God, guys! Get online, John. Why you just have the last word, Karen?
Don't tell me what to do.
I'm just saying, why do you? I asked you a question. Tell me to get on the line.
If I could just finish. When we have looked at this from the very beginning, there was not enough housing production.
Don't tell me to shut up, that is not nice.
6 units of affordable housing have been built between 2014 and 2024 in the area within a quarter-mile of the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. 6 units of affordable housing. We are providing, under this preferred plan, 2,600 units of permanently affordable housing, 200 of which would be for night-shift residents, as well as $50 million that could be able to support off-site affordable housing. So that's a really important goal, to provide affordable housing. But in every single place that we can build housing, we are trying to build housing.
I'm just saying, it's not
and so
okay.
we have been clear of that goal from the very beginning. So that's on the goals. On the process, we have been able to work, as the Congressman said, with the task force from the very beginning of this to incorporate their feedback and the community's feedback. We have not, I would say, that we have not been lying, we have not been obfuscating about any of that. We've tried a variety of ways in which to do this. Do it in a way that engages people. And to the point that you brought up around the 12,000 units of housing, what we had showed previously in the 4 scenarios, where we are at the preferred scenario, there was one that was the maximum housing scenario that did have, to be specific, 12,000 units of housing. And so we put that off to the side because from feedback from the task force, as well as the other 3 scenarios, which brings us to the specific to the scenario that we have in the preferred scenario now. And in the specifics is 7,700 units of housing, which has come down in response to feedback from the task force and in response to feedback from the community. So from the beginning, we have been clear that there will be changes, but that we need to get to the goals that I talked about at the beginning. Financially viable port that can stand on its own 2 feet, provide housing, and also have other community amenities. And do that in a way that is protective of our fiduciary responsibility as a city to protect our budget. Those have been clear from the very beginning. If you look at our first meetings, you will see that there.
I beg the difference. You had a meeting where you presented one number to the public. You had a secret meeting, closed-door meeting, that afterwards, where you had this incredible number. It doesn't really matter what, we're quibbling about a few units now. My point is the same. We have no trust in the process and the people in it. Right? And that's not my fault. That's not our fault.
I hear you, James. I think we
And
should.
you still have not addressed how you could even think about a 10-year, which means 15 or 20, anybody who's done construction knows that, even a simple renovation, how that is going to happen with the BQE crumbling at the end where everyone is going and coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to James and to the panel. I'll next go over to Miss at this mic on the right.
Hi, thank you. My name is Karen O'Donnell. I am Sadie Luke's mom, the one that was up here before. I had a couple of different questions. One was speaking to those AMI percentages for these affordable housing units at NYCHA, and who is going to be able to qualify for those, at what percentages. From the research that I've done, and also I spoke to a Spencer Williams earlier. I think his colleague Aaron is here. I think he might be a part of the task force or the Brooklyn Borough or something on our programs. But the way he was explaining it to me was saying that these AMRs and percentages don't really work out in favor to the people that can afford them, or that they're proposing that they think these percentages that they can afford at this number. They put it at such an income level where the people are not going to be able to afford the rent based on the incomes that are qualifying for this. So it just seems kind of like a little bit of a rigged system and just not honest. I don't know if anyone here has ever won a lottery. Raise your hand, but...
One. Wow, congratulations.
Yeah.
You're an anomaly.
I mean, I think if we can keep the arrogance and dismissiveness like out of this emotionally right now.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Let me get a response to that on the AMI note.
Hi, thank you for your question. So, let me take a step back and
I guess I'm not saying it because I'm a single mom and none of those AMI numbers work for me.
So the affordable housing system is it's a federal system. It's a federal system that those are the constraints that we're working within. What it does is it creates an area median income for families of various sizes. You can look it up online to see what they are. In general, for New York City, the area median income for a family of 4 is just under $130,000 a year. So what it does then is it sizes the units based on the number of people. So a family of 4 would be assumed to be a 3-bedroom, a 2 or 3 bedroom, and then it sets the rents equal to about 30% of the annual income. So that's how that system works.
So what would the rent be for some 30% and 130,000?
30% of 130,000. What's that? That's 36, 39.
But that's not 100% AMI,
Right. The other thing to note is that what we're proposing is an average of 60% AMI, and what we anticipate is that there would be a range of affordability within this project. So some of the units would be at 40%, some would be at 80%, some could even be a little lower than that. We're talking about an average of 60%, and so there would be units at different sizes and different affordability levels.
So for the HPD currently with a 60% AMI for a studio is $1,600 per month, $1,700 for a 1-bedroom, $22,000 for a 2, and up to $2,500 at 60% AMI.
Okay, so for people, 2-person household, right, for a 1 or 2 bedroom, whatever the qualifications are, because I'm pretty sure, in that range, you're not gonna be able to get a 3-bedroom, depending on how many people you have in the unit, is that correct? Okay, great. So, I guess that's where the affordability part comes in, about it, the numbers don't match.
Thank you, Gary, for your question and your comment. I will certainly take it into account. Thank you. Next to person on the left, please.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Diana Waleska. I'm a resident and I'm on CS15 department. I can see you really hit the nail on the head when she said that we're really feeling a lot of fear and we're feeling anxiety because what you're describing, and I think the gentleman, a few people before me, he's talking about, like, what we're talking about here is a whole new city that we're adding next door to our village. for them, and this neighborhood has historically been disinvested in, and promises have been broken, and commitments have been made, commitments have not been kept. And so the whole feeling is that, are we going to, as parents, be able to live here for the long term, where our families have a home place to continue to be for the long term? Or will we no longer be able to live in this neighborhood? Will we be put out? So what in this is for us? I know that there will be more buses. We're thinking about resiliency. Those are things that are good, right? Those are helpful things to improve transportation, to improve resiliency. But making sure that when you add in loads of market rate rent, everything goes up, right? And you're pointing out that we're less than 2 miles from the financial district. And so then this is an incredible neighborhood as it is. There are things that we need, but when we think about what that means for the families that are here now, it feels like, are we going to be able to stay here for the long term? The reason I bring up PS 15 is in the last meeting we were at, we talked about the fact that there would be potentially another school being developed, and yet what's happening to support the schools that already exist. And so I'm curious to think about what supports are we providing for the folks that are already here, and the things that will, if we have a brand new beautiful school for market rate people, and then we have a school that has been historically neglected and abused, frankly, for years, that disparity creates like a really horrible situation that I don't think anyone would feel very proud of. And so I think it's something to consider. Another kind of more like very base consideration is, what are the thoughts around, it's like a pivot, but sewer planning, and we're at the end of the sewer shed, the end of the watershed. I understand if we have a big storm, you have some plans, but what about for like a regular storm that's already happening, when we're adding 20,000 people and all of that coming, what's happening to the existing buildings? So those are the 2 points that I made.
Thank you very much, Ms. I'm first going to go to Nicole to answer about what does this mean for existing residents, what does this mean for the schools in the area, and then we'll get an answer on the sewer question after that.
Thank you for your question. It's one that we have heard a lot in terms of how will this development support the existing neighborhood and existing community. So for you, Betsy, we can go back to slide 10, where I talked about just some of the commitments that we've been talking about with the task force members that I think speak directly to what you're referring to. So one of those is $200 million investment in NYCHA Red Hook houses, right? I see Ms. Blondell is about to ask a question, and so she and Mrs. Brown have really been advocating for direct investment in NYCHA. So that's one component. This $50 million fund to support affordable home ownership, as well as preserve affordable housing. You'll see the word off-site there, and so what we just mean is not within the boundary of Brooklyn Marine Terminal, but preserving existing affordable housing outside of the terminal. We've heard a lot from these meetings and from the survey and some of the other pieces about access to the waterfront, because for as long as the Port Authority has operated the site, there are sort of few opportunities to engage with the waterfront. We've heard a lot about challenges with the existing greenway. Folks send us videos of, like the freight trucks on the existing greenway. That's a real issue for community members now that we see our proposed plan as supporting. I really don't want to skip over the workforce development conversation, because what we've heard from task force members is that there are a lot of different existing community members who are looking for jobs and who are looking for good paying jobs. And so when we're thinking about a 60-acre port, we talked a little bit about the Blue Highway, we talked a little bit about the industrial space. Those are new jobs coming online that folks are going to need to be trained for. They'll need certifications. They might need a driver's license. They might need, some type of certification to even access the port. And so being very intentional about that is not just for new residents before existing residents. So the conversation about the school, we'd love to talk offline with you about PS15 in particular. But just to be clear, if and when the task force approves a site plan, that plan will have to go through environmental review. And so that is when we'll look to understand, the needs from the fire department, from police, from other infrastructure, including schools. And so what we have as an early understanding is that because of that BMT North portion, the 3,800 units of housing, we anticipate that a school would need to be there, and that's on the northern portion of the site. There's no current understanding about an additional school being on the southern Atlantic Basin or Red Hook site. And then I want to pass it to Pippa to talk about the sewers.
So obviously drainage is a current issue, and stormwater flooding and backup is an issue we all feel here today that will only exacerbate in the future. And that's why the stormwater management has been an integral part of the process from the outset. EDC meets regularly, and by regularly I mean like every week or every other week with New York City DEP. And a New York City DEP-led drainage plan for the BMT site, but for the site and all the surrounding waters, like the surrounding areas that drain to it, is part of this process. We have one of the commitments that EDC has made to DEP is capturing all the water that falls on the BMT site and managing it, discharging it directly so that it is not flowing into the existing system. So that would basically create relief instead of creating more strain on the system. Obviously, the additional sewer will have to be managed, and part of that, and all of those, the stormwater management and the sewage is going to be part of that plan. To have specific numbers or specifically what would be done is something that it's too early to say. The DEP has requested a full survey of the site, which is almost complete. And we'll be undergoing all those studies that will identify the infrastructure needs and the drainage needs. That's really a fundamental and critical part of the plan. Alexis, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so Pippa's correct, it's too early to talk about what those specific kind of numbers and capacity are, but DEP right now is focusing their drainage plan first on the existing conditions, so looking at sewer capacity, looking at CSOs, and then looking at, additional land uses or any other kind of future conditions to look at what those investments need to be. And they're doing it for the BMT and surrounding areas. That amended drainage plan is going to be completed at the end of this year. And then, because we all know water does not stop at property lines, they're doing an amended drainage plan for the entire Red Hook Peninsula that will be available in 2026.
Thank you very much, Miss, and thank you to the panel. Folks, we're going to push this meeting to 8:45 so we can get in as many questions as we can before the security guard has to close the school up. I want to ask that everybody continuing to ask questions, and to the panelists, to please keep your questions and your answers concise so we can try to ensure that everybody who would like to ask a question can get to one. Please, Ms. Blondell.
Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Blondell, and I'm representing the Red Hook Housing. I heard everything everybody had to say. I know things can be scary, but we have to take a bigger look at this whole situation. If we don't get additional resiliency measures, we only have a 10-year plan. As a part of this presentation, they told you about how the BMT is going to be a second phase to the resiliency plan that we won here in Red Hook. The plan has deployable inflatables. You can find out a lot of that information online just by Googling the Red Hook resiliency process and the IFPS. I want to also say to everyone, it's okay if you don't understand AMI. We have Google, and we also do workshops. It's very easy for you to understand what an AMI is. And we can't change the AMI sitting in this room. We have to change the policies. And that takes a little more strategy and time. But if the AMIs don't fit our particular community, then we need to organize specifically around the AMIs that we want in our community. I will tell you that we did do an AMI class at the Red Oak West office about 2 weeks ago, and we were stunned. So this community district, which is CB6, has about 27,000 families in it. Of that, you have a great portion that are in the very, very extremely poor side. You don't have a lot of middle people. You have an extreme number who is able to pay 130 to 160% of AMI. So that made me scratch my head. How is that possible? Well, I also used to work for the Census Bureau. And so every few years they do some studies in our area where they look at the housing stock. We look at the housing stock for when it was built. Is it gonna last another 50 years? A lot of your buildings that you're talking about, those buildings were built in the 1800s. They don't meet the standards anymore. We do have to think about how we're going to build new and build smart. So I want to say that, number one. So let's not just run and say no. Let's try to get a little more educated on these different processes, including AMI and zoning. And if you really want to talk about it, we can go as far back as the redlining that took place here. There was no housing in this area. This was an IBZ, an industrial business zone. You know who lived here? Woo! The Indians. So you want to talk about public land? It belonged to people like me. My family's buried in Arizona. And I found out some of them was Confederates. Go figure. We have a big history here in this country. We cannot make decisions based off of emotions. We have to look at the big picture. When I looked at the picture of the coastal resiliency for Red Oak, I was proud of what we came up with until the hat showed up and showed the rest of the water out there. And it looks impossible, but nothing's impossible if we work together. We cannot work apart. And I say that to say I've been living in the Red Oak houses since I was 19. I am tired of being veil-penned in public housing where there are people who can pay $2,000 and $3,000 rent. You just don't hear about it because they mix all of our data up together. But if me and my son is working, which happened, the pandemic put a lot of families back together. You have adult children, adult parents there. We might have to really buckle up for a while because it's not just about us. It's about a global climate change that's going on that's going to push people to where they feel safe. If you feel safe in New York, so do other people. Y'all got that when it came to immigration a few months ago, but you seem to not get it when it comes to housing. We cannot be like that. Red Hook was an industrial area. Right now, Red Hook rents, even though it looks like from the 1800s, there are rents going at $15,000 a month by people who are sitting here opposing us getting off of the public housing campus. How fair is that? I've been here since I was 19. I'm 62 years old. I know people who went into Vietnam, came back out, served the country, New York, worked for the country. They're still in public housing. You know why? We all love Red Hook. We don't want to go to the Bronx. We don't want to go somewhere else. We created the atmosphere here. And we can continue to create that if we get ourselves together. You understand? We have to get ourselves together, and it's complex. It is complex, but we can do it. And so I'm gonna stop right there, but I'm telling you, we do need housing here. Back during the 197A plan, and you could go look that up too, we asked for more housing here. If we're not gonna use the IBZ, like Trump didn't want us to use it, and put the pollution back in the air here, then we gotta figure out what we're gonna do with some of this land here. And one of the things I don't want to see go is the container terminal. I'm food insecure. I feel better if food stops in Red Hook. I don't care if it goes to Hunts Point. Hunts Point is the Bronx. This is Brooklyn. We need a utility closet for our food over here. And so let's really think about this and not be emotional about it and really take the time to learn what AMI is, what GPP is, because the same people who are arguing, we want Europe, 5 years ago were saying, Europe is antiquated. I'm not a piece of grass that gets blown back and forth. I research things. When I come to a decision, I'm usually gonna go with that decision. Unless something else really convinces me to make a 180, and then I will. I can say I'm wrong, but I don't think we're wrong right now. We have to be deliberate, because it's gonna happen anyway. The next mayor is talking about even more housing. So let's think about this carefully.
We want to make sure we can get her home on time, and also we've got families to get back to, so I'll ask folks to keep comments concise. I want to ask the Chinese and Spanish interpreters, please indicate if there's any comments from you all, so that we can go to you as well. And Miss at the front of the room, over to you.
I'll go really quick. Can you hear me? Sorry, my husband's immunocompromised, so I'm asked. My name's Kiersey. My husband's a furniture designer and maker on Dykeman Street, so we're obviously concerned about how market rate housing will affect his rent, because it's not just about this project, as well as how it's going to displace native Red Hook residents by raising the rent in the area. I do want to call out that I appreciate the changes being made in how this workshop's being run, the transparency on the slides, and some of the really important changes in this plan that are much needed, like the $200 million to the Red Hook houses. But also everyone in this room knows those changes were only made because we fought for them and because of the anger at these meetings. I think 35% affordable housing is shameful. Sharmana Hanif negotiated 40% housing recently on a project with developers. This is publicly owned land. But I do really want to ask if you can expand on the $50 million fund to support affordable home ownerships, which was kind of glazed over, the $200 million for the Red Hook houses, what those improvements actually look like, and those 200 units for the New York City Housing Authority residents as well, because those affect the most marginalized communities in this neighborhood, and it was glossed completely over as a ticket that we should be thankful for, but I want details.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So let me start with the Affordable Housing Fund. This is a program that's run by our colleagues at HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, that we would essentially be expanding for projects, again, off-site of BMT. And so the details of how that funding is dispersed, what existing affordable units are preserved, there aren't details on that yet because it's a current proposal, right? So just to be clear about that. For the NYCHA Red Hook houses improvements, there's a lot of coordination and conversation happening with NYCHA itself over existing capital needs and how best to invest those funds. But I want to be clear that those conversations are also happening with the NYCHA Tenant Association. So it's not happening within a box, and I think Ms. Blondell talked about that a little bit in terms of the coordination. In terms of the 200 units being reserved for NYCHA residents, this is an idea that came from the NYCHA TA leaders themselves about particularly for the population that Ms. Blondell referenced when you have young people. Okay, so those are, so the level of detail that you're asking for, you're right, we don't have that yet because we also don't have a approved plan yet. What we're saying is that as part of these conversations, and yes, as part of the engagement with the community and the asks, these are the things that as we've gone through the finances of the plan, we can deliver.
Thank you very much, Liz.
Excuse me, Dan Goldman, please.
Sir.
Yes, Dan Goldman left.
Sir, you have the next question, please.
Hi, my name is Tim Gilman-Shefcheek. I'm a long-term resident of Red Hook and also was founding executive director of Ready Center, which is a local workforce and climate adaptation organization. I'm going to try to be really quick. I have three things: requests, suggestions, and questions. Can we go back to the ideal slide of the ideal plan? It's one slide previous to this, I think. So I think we would all appreciate transparency on this diagram. So for example, anywhere that is housing or mixed-use housing can be labeled as such. So BMT North, BMT South, I would assume that the fringe area in between it could be labeled as mixed-use housing. I think that would be good because the use of all the other spaces is indicated. I think it would be great if we could see a comparison of the square footage of the housing in relation to all the other square footage distributions. So if you go to the next slide. So, I'm sorry, maybe it was two slides, it was a slide previous to this, but there were statistics about the square footage usage of every allocated area.
That's at the end, Betty, the final. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't write down the number of the slide.
It's the very last one. So
it would be very helpful to see what amount of square footage, not just units that we're talking about, and of the affordable units, it would be very good to see the square footage of the market rate housing units versus the square footage of the affordable housing units, because perhaps we could achieve 35% of the square footage for affordable housing, not just of the number of units, because presumably the affordable housing units are going to be smaller than the market rate units. I could be wrong, I don't know. Anyway, so I think that would all help to have transparency in the map. I think that a couple of suggestions is that we've talked about an allocation of $300 million to this point. There was a promise made a long time ago about a head tax on the cruise ship terminal passengers. That money has not come to Red Hook. If we're talking about a 10-year development plan, that is millions of dollars every year that can be allocated towards this project. It's long overdue. I think we also would love to see that there are not going to be tax breaks given to these developers as an incentive for them to develop this market rate housing. So I think that would be another, like what kind of additional real estate taxes can we look at as revenue sources for the neighborhood and for the ongoing development of this. And then I would also ask the RHCR, the Red Hook Coastal Resilience Plan, which is $100 million, which is a very substantial amount in relation to the amount of dollars we have allocated already. Is there a way that it could be integrated in a more forward-thinking manner? It is a 10-year flood plan. It's extremely low value, a very high price for very, very little return. Yes?
Thank you so much.
Okay, and I have a question, which is, can we ask for, and this is for Escape, can we ask for design requirements such as permeable pavement or other mitigation efforts that would be built into the design? And also, can we have local hiring requirements for the construction of all of these things? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, I can start with the design guidelines. So design requirements that help us achieve all these goals would be part of the GPP. One of the next phases of the GPP, once the GPP is passed, is actually to develop the design guidelines for any development that happens here. So yes, that's the answer is yes.
And we'll just add that one of the commitments is that 100% of the stormwater will be managed on site. So that would mean green roofs, permeable pavers, all kinds of different stormwater detention and retention.
All of the techniques we need.
Yeah. What about the taxes?
One other element for transparency would be to be a profile of the skyline projected. I think that would really be welcome.
And I will say, I really appreciate your feedback on how we can better communicate on these topics. So we will absolutely take all of those comments to heart. I will just answer the question about local hiring. So in terms of programs in New York City, the state legislature, signed by the governor, passed a bill for community hiring. It's a little bit different than what we think of as local hiring, but it still has residence-based qualifications. So it means if you're a resident at NYCHA, it means if you are in a community that's under a certain poverty level, yes, there are community hiring goals for, yes, for construction, but also for the tenanting of any future projects. So, for example, you might be familiar with the Economic Mobility Network that we've done back down in Sunset Park. We put out that RFP, and so the idea is that we would have a similar model, Economic Mobility Network, for the Brooklyn Marine Terminal that is like expressly about connecting existing local residents to these jobs, and we can share more about that because we obviously really appreciate the work that Ready Center does.
Thank you. I think it is unlikely we are going to get to every comment here. I do want to remind folks there is another presentation of this meeting with another Q&A session coming up on the 13th at 6:30 p.m. Please, sir, go ahead.
Yes, Arthur Stoyer, 15-year resident. My first question is, how did the city-led Port Authority get away with leaving us in the lurch to fix and, all the negligence that they perpetrated over all those years? I mean, it seems to be a shame that we have to pay for that. I mean, somebody should have made a better deal.
Yeah, better deal.
Please do.
Thank you for your question. The overarching deal that was created back about a year ago was a swap between properties. So the city owned, but
Along Columbia Street.
No, I'm not talking about buildings, I'm talking about the flood.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear what I was saying.
So the target design elevation for the flood wall is about 21 feet, NAV D88, 21 feet above mean sea level, which is 10 to 15 feet higher than the existing grade in most locations. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a 10 to 15 foot high wall in those places, because as part of the development, we're proposing raising the grade. So then that lowers the height of the wall. Additionally, because of the Greenway corridor and because of the open space proposed in PMT South, we're able to integrate that wall into park space. So in most places, it won't even be visible or manifest itself as a wall. And in other places, you're looking at a wall anywhere from 3 to 8 feet, depending on that.
Can I just suggest that the people that wanted to ask questions can submit written questions that are guaranteed to be answered at your next session?
Yeah.
Officer, can we just finish it up? We have to close this meeting. So I'm really sorry, we have to close the meeting. Folks, please do submit your question online and we'll